I unlocked the front door and stepped into the dimly lit hallway, the weight of the day still clinging to me like a heavy coat. The house was unusually quiet, save for the distant hum of the refrigerator. I tossed my keys on the table and made my way towards the living room. As I passed by the kitchen, I noticed Nina's phone lying on the counter, its screen glowing faintly in the darkness. Curiosity tugged at me, and I glanced down at the screen. There was a message from someone named M, a name I didn't immediately recognize. Without thinking, I picked up the phone and read the message. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible. Let's meet at our usual place." A cold wave of dread washed over me, sending a chill down my spine. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a surge of nausea. I knew I shouldn't jump to conclusions, but the implications were hard to ignore. Who was M, and what exactly had happened last night? As I stood there, frozen, I heard faint voices coming from the other room. I quietly went down the hall and stopped just outside the bedroom door. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, I could hear Nina's voice, soft and almost seductive. "He doesn't suspect a thing. Mike, I promise, everything's under control. We just have to be careful." Mike. My mind raced as I pieced it together. Mike was her business partner, someone I had never thought twice about. They spent hours together working on their projects, always talking about new ideas and strategies. I had trusted them both, Nina, my wife, and Mike, my friend. But now, as I stood there, listening to their hushed conversation, I realized the truth: they were having an affair. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks, knocking my breath out. I felt a mixture of anger, betrayal, and an overwhelming sense of loss. How long had this been going on? How many times had I been the fool, believing her lies? I wanted to burst into the room, to confront them both, to demand answers. But something held me back. Perhaps it was the shock, or maybe the dawning understanding that confronting them now would only give them the upper hand. They would have time to concoct their excuses, to spin the situation in their favor. No, I needed to be smarter than that. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about making them pay for what they had done, about making sure they felt the same pain and humiliation that I was feeling right now. I had always been a patient man, calculating and methodical in everything I did. And now, I would use those skills to dismantle their lives, piece by piece. I turned away from the door, my mind already racing with ideas. I would not confront them tonight. Instead, I would bide my time, gather evidence, and plan my moves carefully. They wouldn't see it coming. As I walked back down the hallway, a grim determination settled over me. They thought they had fooled me, that they were in control. But they had no idea what was coming. I would make sure of that. The night after the revelation, sleep was elusive. My mind churned with thoughts of betrayal and anger, but underneath it all, a cold, calculating resolve began to take shape. If Nina and Mike thought they could deceive me and walk away unscathed, they were gravely mistaken. I would turn their web of lies against them, trapping them in a snare of their own making. By the time dawn broke, I had the outlines of a plan. It wasn't enough to simply expose their affair. No, that would be too easy. I wanted them to feel the same sense of devastation that I had felt when I overheard their deceit. I wanted to dismantle everything they had built together, their relationship, their business, their lives, until there was nothing left but ashes. The first step was to play the part of the oblivious husband. I had to pretend that nothing had changed, that I was still the same trusting, supportive partner I had always been. It was harder than I thought it would be, but the thought of my endgame kept me focused. Every morning, I kissed Nina on the cheek, asked about her day, and even offered to help with her business projects. I listened to her talk about Mike as if nothing were amiss, each mention of his name twisting the knife a little deeper into my chest. But behind the mask of normalcy, I began to subtly sabotage their work. Nina and Mike's business was built on trust and precision, two things I could easily undermine. I started with small, seemingly insignificant details. I accidentally misfiled important documents, delayed responses to emails, and made minor errors in accounting that would go unnoticed at first but would cause problems down the line. In meetings, I would suggest ideas that seemed beneficial at first glance but had hidden flaws that would only become apparent later, when it was too late to reverse course. I played the role of the supportive husband perfectly, offering encouragement and advice, all while knowing that I was laying the groundwork for their downfall. It was a delicate balance. I couldn't move too quickly or be too obvious. I had to be patient, to let the cracks in their foundation widen on their own. Each mistake, each setback would seem like a natural occurrence, an unfortunate coincidence that no one could have predicted. Nina, of course, noticed the growing tension in the business, but she never suspected that I was behind it. She would come home frustrated, venting about the challenges they were facing, and I would nod sympathetically, offering words of comfort while silently savoring each small victory. Mike, too, was feeling the strain, though he tried to hide it. I could see the stress in his eyes during our occasional meetings. The way he avoided my gaze when we discussed their faltering projects. The beauty of the plan was in its simplicity. I wasn't doing anything overtly malicious, I was just nudging events in the right direction, letting their actions compound the problems. The more they struggled to keep things afloat, the deeper they would sink into the mess I was creating. As the days turned into weeks, the strain on their relationship began to show. They started arguing more often, their trust in each other eroding as their business began to falter. It was exactly what I had hoped for. The foundation of lies they had built their affair on was beginning to crumble, and soon, it would collapse entirely. But this was just the beginning. The real destruction was yet to come. I wasn't satisfied with merely destabilizing their business. I wanted to expose them for who they were, to make sure everyone saw the truth. And when the time was right, I would pull the final string, unraveling their lives completely. For now, I continued to play my role, patiently waiting for the moment when everything would fall apart. They had no idea that the man they thought they were deceiving was the one orchestrating their downfall. And that thought, more than anything, gave me the strength to keep going. The time had come to escalate my plan. The subtle sabotages had done their job, sowing seeds of doubt and discord between Nina and Mike. Their once flourishing business was now on shaky ground, and I knew the next step would need to be more drastic. More definitive. I had to create a situation that would not only harm their business but also put them at odds with each other in a way they couldn't ignore. Mike was the key. If I could make him look incompetent or, better yet, corrupt, it would not only damage their business but also destroy the trust Nina had in him. It had to be something big, something that couldn't be easily explained away. For weeks, I had been gathering information and studying the inner workings of their business. I knew their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities. One of their biggest clients was a company with strict compliance standards. Any hint of financial irregularity would send them running. I decided that was where I would strike. I waited for the perfect opportunity, biding my time until I found a project where the stakes were high. It was a major deal, one that could make or break their quarter. Mike was the lead on this project, handling the finances and ensuring everything was above board. But under the surface, I had already planted the seeds of his failure. One afternoon, when Mike was out of the office, I accidentally sent an incorrect financial report to the client, one that showed discrepancies in their tax payments. It was a subtle manipulation, enough to raise red flags but not so obvious that it looked intentional. I knew the client would notice, and when they did, it would set off a chain reaction that Mike wouldn't be able to stop. But that wasn't enough. I needed to make sure the fallout was severe. So, I went a step further. Using a burner phone and a secure email account, I drafted an anonymous tip to the tax authorities, detailing the supposed financial misconduct. I painted a picture of a company engaged in questionable practices, hinting that Mike was the mastermind behind it all. I knew the authorities wouldn't ignore such a tip, especially not with the documentation I provided. I pressed send, feeling a cold satisfaction wash over me. The wheels were now in motion, and there was no turning back. Days later, the effects of my actions began to ripple through their business. The client, alarmed by the discrepancies, immediately contacted Nina and Mike, demanding an explanation. Nina was frantic, trying to smooth things over, but the damage was already done. The client was threatening to pull out of the deal, and their reputation was on the line. Mike, on the other hand, was blindsided. He had no idea how this could have happened, and his desperation was palpable. He spent hours poring over the financials, trying to figure out where he had gone wrong. But the more he looked, the more it seemed like the errors were his fault. And that's exactly what I wanted. Then came the audit. The tax authorities, acting on the anonymous tip, launched an investigation into their business. They demanded records, scrutinized every transaction, and questioned every decision Mike had made. The stress was unbearable for both of them, but for Mike, it was a nightmare. His career, his reputation, and everything he had worked for were now under threat. Nina, of course, was furious. She couldn't understand how Mike could have let this happen, and the trust between them began to fracture even more. Every time she looked at him, I could see the doubt in her eyes. Was he really that careless? Or was there something more sinister at play? The financial loss was significant. The client pulled out, their business took a hit, and the fines from the tax authorities only added to the pressure. But the real damage was to their relationship. Nina started to distance herself from Mike, questioning every decision he made. The man she had once trusted implicitly was now a liability, a weakness that could bring everything crashing down. And that was exactly what I had intended. With one calculated move, I had turned them against each other, deepening the cracks in their partnership and ensuring that their business was on the verge of collapse. But this was just the beginning of the end. As I watched the chaos unfold, I knew that the final act was drawing near. And when it did, there would be no going back for any of us. As the dust from the financial disaster began to settle, I could see the strain etched into every line on Nina's face. She was a woman who prided herself on control over her business, her relationships, and her life. But now, that control was slipping away, and she was grasping at straws, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. Her trust in Mike was eroding, just as I had planned. The mistakes in their business dealings had been too glaring, too damaging to simply chalk up to bad luck or simply human error. And while Mike continued to protest his innocence, scrambling to fix the mess, I could see that Nina was beginning to doubt him. At first, it was subtle, little comments here and there, questioning his judgment or second-guessing his decisions. But as the days passed, her suspicions grew. She started to scrutinize everything he did, looking for explanations that he couldn't provide. And when he failed to come up with answers, her mind began to wander to darker places. It wasn't long before Nina started suspecting that Mike's incompetence might be intentional. Maybe he was hiding something from her, something more than just a few accounting errors. The thought gnawed at her, keeping her awake at night, turning every minor incident into a potential conspiracy. I could see the toll it was taking on her, the way her eyes would narrow whenever Mike spoke as if she was searching for some hidden truth beneath his words. One evening, as I pretended to read the newspaper, I noticed Nina pacing the living room, her brow furrowed in deep thought. She was holding her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen as if debating whether or not to send a message. Finally, she stopped and looked at me. "Victor, do you think Mike may be hiding something from me?" she asked, her voice strained. I lowered the newspaper, feigning surprise. "What do you mean?" "I don't know, it's just, lately, things haven't been adding up. The mistakes, the financial problems. I'm starting to wonder if Mike is doing this on purpose. Maybe he's involved in something behind my back, or maybe he's even seeing someone else." I had to suppress a smile. This was exactly what I had hoped for. The seed of doubt had been planted, and now it was beginning to grow, twisting Nina's perception of the man she had once trusted implicitly. "Do you think he would do something like that?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral as if I were genuinely concerned. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know. I mean, I never thought he would, but lately, he's been so distant, so secretive. And with everything going wrong at work, I don't know what to think anymore." I nodded sympathetically, offering her the reassurance she needed. "Maybe it's just stress, Nina. You've both been under a lot of pressure. But if you feel like something's off, maybe you should talk to him about it. Get everything out in the open." She looked at me, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "You're right. I need to know what's going on." As she walked away, I felt a surge of satisfaction. Nina was now questioning everything, not just about Mike's competence but about his loyalty. The doubts I had nurtured were starting to consume her, and I could see that it was only a matter of time before they pushed her to take action. Meanwhile, I continued to play the role of the supportive husband, offering her comfort and advice while secretly relishing every moment of her growing anxiety. I would casually mention how difficult it must be for her to manage both the business and her personal life, subtly reinforcing the idea that perhaps Mike wasn't as trustworthy as she had once believed. Nina began to distance herself from Mike, both emotionally and professionally. She started taking on more of the business responsibilities herself, no longer relying on him as she once did. And the more she pulled away, the more desperate Mike became, trying to salvage what was left of their partnership. But it was too late. The damage had been done, and the doubts I had sown were blossoming into full-blown suspicions. Nina's mind was a whirlpool of fears and uncertainties, and she was slowly but surely losing faith in the man she had once considered her closest ally. And I watched it all unfold with a sense of dark satisfaction, knowing that every crack in their relationship brought me closer to my ultimate goal. The perfect opportunity to confront Mike presented itself one Friday evening. I knew he was working late at the office, trying to fix the mess I had created. I decided to drop by unexpectedly, under the guise of offering a friendly ear and some much-needed support. It was time to push the next piece of the puzzle into place, to start turning Mike's mind against Nina. As I walked into the dimly lit office, I saw him hunched over his desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and an array of screens displaying spreadsheets and emails. He looked exhausted, the weight of the past few weeks etched into his features. I knocked lightly on the doorframe, and he looked up, surprised to see me. "Victor, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice strained. "I thought you could use some company," I said, stepping into the room. "You've been working yourself to the bone lately. I figured we could talk, maybe take a break." Mike sighed and leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "Yeah, I suppose a break wouldn't hurt. It's been a rough few weeks." I pulled up a chair and sat down across from him, making sure to keep my tone casual. As if this was just a friendly chat between old friends. "I can see that. Nina's been worried about you, too. She says you've been taking all of this hard." He nodded, looking even more tired. "It's just, everything's falling apart, Victor. I don't know how it happened, but we're losing clients, our finances are a mess, and now the tax audit. I'm doing everything I can to keep things together, but it feels like it's slipping out of my control." I leaned in slightly as if sharing a secret. "Mike, I've been thinking. You know, with all the stress and pressure you're under, it's easy to lose sight of things. But have you ever considered that maybe, just maybe, Nina isn't telling you everything?" He frowned, confusion flickering across his face. "What do you mean?" I chose my words carefully, making sure to plant the seed of doubt without being too direct. "Well, it's just, Nina's been taking on a lot more of the business responsibilities lately, right? Handling things on her own. Making decisions without consulting you as much. I know she's ambitious, and maybe she's trying to prove something to herself, or maybe even to you." Mike's frown deepened as he processed what I was saying. I could see the gears turning in his mind, the uncertainty starting to take root. "Victor, are you suggesting that Nina's, I don't know, using me?" I shrugged, feigning reluctance. "I'm not saying she is. But think about it. She's been distancing herself from you, taking control. And now you're the one left to pick up the pieces when things go wrong. It just makes me wonder, what if she's positioning herself to take over completely? Maybe she's not telling you everything because she has her agenda." The idea was now firmly planted in his mind, and I could see the doubt growing. Mike had always trusted Nina, but with everything that had happened, he was vulnerable, looking for someone or something to blame. I had given him the perfect target. He stared at the floor for a long moment, the tension in the room thickening. "I don't know, Victor. I never thought Nina would do something like that. But lately, things have been so strange between us. She's been more secretive, more distant. Maybe you're right. Maybe she's been planning something all along." I placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder as if offering comfort. "I'm not trying to make you paranoid, Mike. But sometimes, it's better to be cautious, especially when so much is at stake. Just, keep your eyes open. Okay? You deserve to know the truth." He nodded slowly, his mind racing with doubts. "Yeah, I'll keep that in mind." As I left the office, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. The seeds of mistrust were now firmly planted in Mike's mind, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they began to sprout. He would start questioning Nina's every move, every decision, driving a wedge between them that would only grow wider with time. The beauty of the plan was that neither of them would see it coming. Nina and Mike were so focused on the external problems they faced, the failing business, the financial losses, that they couldn't see the true threat lurking within. And that was exactly how I wanted it. They were now on a path of mutual destruction, one that I had carefully crafted from the shadows. As I walked out into the cool night air, I couldn't help but smile. The pieces were all falling into place, and soon, their lives would be as shattered as mine had been. The next phase of my plan required a deeper dive into the past. I knew that if I could find something truly incriminating, something that would not only shatter Nina and Mike's professional relationship but also destroy their reputations, I would have them exactly where I wanted them. So, I spent hours going through old company files, financial records, and emails, searching for any skeletons they might have buried. It wasn't long before I hit pay dirt. Hidden among the mundane paperwork, I discovered a series of financial documents from several years ago, documents that detailed some questionable transactions. At first glance, they appeared to be standard business dealings, but as I dug deeper, I realized they were part of a scheme to evade taxes and inflate the company's revenue. Both Nina's and Mike's signatures were all over them. It was the kind of information that, if exposed, could ruin them both. I knew this was my trump card. But rather than holding onto it, I decided to let the past haunt them in the most dramatic way possible. I wanted Nina to feel the panic, the fear of everything she had worked for crumbling down around her. So, I set the stage. One evening, when Nina was out running errands, I casually left the incriminating documents on her desk at home, half covered by other papers, as if they had been carelessly tossed there. It was the perfect trap, one that would draw her in and unleash the chaos I needed. When she returned, I made sure to be in the other room, close enough to hear her reaction. I could hear her footsteps as she entered the office, the sound of papers rustling as she sorted through them. Then, a pause. I imagined her eyes scanning the pages, the shock slowly dawning on her as she realized what she had stumbled upon. "Victor," she called, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. I walked in, feigning ignorance. "What's wrong?" She looked up at me, her face pale. "Where did you find these?" I glanced at the documents, pretending to be confused. "Those? I found them while I was cleaning out the storage room." "Why? Are they important?" Nina's hands shook as she held the papers. These could ruin us, Victor. If anyone found out about this." "Found out about what?" I asked, my tone deliberately innocent. She hesitated, clearly trying to figure out how much she could tell me. "These are old financial records. They're not exactly legal. If someone were to report this, we could be in serious trouble. Mike and I could lose everything." I watched as she crumpled under the weight of her deceit, her mind racing with the potential consequences. The fear in her eyes was exactly what I had hoped for. "Maybe you should talk to Mike about it," I suggested, as if I were genuinely concerned. "He might know what to do." Nina nodded absently, already lost in her thoughts. I knew she would confront Mike, and the tension between them would only grow stronger. But this was just the beginning. The real devastation would come later, in a setting where their secrets would be laid bare for everyone to see. The following week, Nina and Mike were scheduled to host a high-profile business dinner with some of their most important clients and partners. It was a make-or-break moment for their struggling company, and I knew it was the perfect opportunity to expose them. The documents were still fresh in Nina's mind, and I could tell she was on edge, worried that something might go wrong. I had made sure everything was in place. The venue was a sleek, upscale restaurant in the city center, where the atmosphere was as polished as the clientele. I attended the dinner as well, playing the supportive husband, there to back Nina in what she hoped would be a night of networking and new opportunities. As the evening progressed, I watched the two of them carefully. Nina was trying her best to keep up appearances, smiling through her anxiety, while Mike put on a confident front, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. But I knew that underneath it all, they were both teetering on the edge, their composure a fragile facade. It was during the main course that I decided to strike. I waited for a lull in the conversation, the moment when all eyes were on Nina and Mike, and then I made my move. "Nina," I said, my voice cutting through the chatter. "I was wondering if you could explain something to me. I was looking through some old company records the other day, and I found something interesting." The room went silent, and everyone's attention suddenly focused on us. I could see the color drain from Nina's face as she realized what was happening. What did you find, Victor?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, just some financial documents," I said casually, pulling the papers from my briefcase and placing them on the table. "It seems there were some, let's say, creative accounting practices going on a few years back. Isn't that right, Mike?" Mike's expression shifted from confusion to horror as he recognized the documents. He glanced at Nina, panic flashing in his eyes. "Victor, this isn't the time or place," Nina started, but I cut her off. "Why not? We're all friends here, right?" And I'm sure your clients would appreciate knowing the truth about how their money was being handled. The clients exchanged uneasy glances, their interest piqued by the sudden turn of events. One of them, a sharp-eyed woman who had been in the business long enough to know when something was amiss, leaned forward. "What exactly are you implying, Victor?" she asked. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. "I'm implying that Nina and Mike have been hiding some very questionable financial practices. Practices that could not only ruin their company but also put their partners at risk." The room erupted in whispers as the gravity of my words sank in. Nina looked like she was about to faint, while Mike's face was a mask of desperation. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Is this true?" one of the clients demanded, turning to Nina. "Have you been lying to us?" Nina stammered, trying to find a way out, but there was no escape. The evidence was right there on the table, and there was no way to explain it away. The clients began to murmur amongst themselves, some already reaching for their phones, likely to call their lawyers or accountants. Mike, realizing the full extent of the damage, finally found his voice. "This isn't what it looks like," he said, but his words lacked conviction. "There's an explanation," but no one was listening. The trust that Nina and Mike had worked so hard to build was crumbling before their eyes, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. I watched as they both struggled to maintain control, their reputations unraveling in real time. Nina's carefully constructed image as a savvy, trustworthy businesswoman was shattered, and Mike's career was in tatters. The clients began to leave, their faith in the partnership was destroyed, and by the end of the night, it was clear that their business was all but finished. As I left the restaurant, I couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction. The plan had worked better than I could have imagined. Nina and Mike were now facing the consequences of their actions, and their once promising future was in ruins. But as I walked into the cool night, a part of me wondered if this victory was as sweet as I had hoped. The destruction was complete, but so was the emptiness that followed. Their lives were in shambles, but what did that make mine? After the disastrous dinner, I expected Nina to crumble under the weight of her guilt and the collapse of her carefully constructed life. But Nina was more resilient than I had given her credit for. The next morning, as I sat in the kitchen nursing a cup of coffee and relishing the aftermath of my carefully executed plan, I noticed a change in her demeanor. Gone was the frantic, panicked woman from the night before. In her place was someone colder, more calculating, a woman with a plan of her own. Nina had always been resourceful, but now she was something else entirely. She had become a cornered animal, dangerous and unpredictable, willing to do whatever it took to survive. And she had set her sights on me. It started subtly, with small, almost imperceptible changes in the way she interacted with me. She was no longer avoiding me or showing signs of fear. Instead, she was cool, almost indifferent, as if she had accepted her fate and moved on. But I knew better. I could sense the undercurrent of tension in her voice, the way she would glance at me with a mixture of contempt and something else, something darker. A few days later, I began to notice that my calls to some of our mutual business contacts were going unanswered, and emails were mysteriously left unreplied. At first, I thought it was just the fallout from the dinner. But then I received a call from one of my closest friends, who worked in legal consulting. "Victor, you need to be careful," he warned, his tone grave. "I've heard some things, troubling things. Nina's been talking to people, and there's a rumor going around that you've been deliberately sabotaging her business, spreading lies, and trying to ruin her reputation out of jealousy." I nearly dropped the phone. "What? That's absurd. You know I'd never do something like that." "I know, but the way she's spinning it. Victor, she's convincing. She's already got a few people believing her, and if this keeps up, it could get ugly." I hung up, my mind racing. Nina was on the offensive, and she wasn't just defending herself, she was turning the tables on me. I underestimated her capacity for retaliation, and now she was using her connections and resources to paint me as the villain. But Nina didn't stop there. The real blow came when I received a notice from her lawyer, summoning me to a meeting. She was accusing me of slander and sabotage, claiming that my actions had directly led to the collapse of her business. The documents they presented were meticulously crafted, filled with emails and notes that had been manipulated to paint me as a scheming, bitter husband, desperate to ruin his wife after discovering her affair. It was a masterful stroke. Nina and Mike had joined forces against me, and together, they were rewriting the narrative to suit their needs. They portrayed me as unhinged, a man who had lost control after discovering the betrayal, lashing out in a fit of jealous rage. And the worst part? They had evidence, fabricated or not, that supported their story. As I sat in the lawyer's office, the walls closing in around me, I realized just how deep in trouble I was. Nina had turned the entire situation on its head, and now I was the one on the defensive, scrambling to protect my reputation. The people I had once trusted, the business partners and friends who had always believed in me, were now questioning my sanity and my motives. Nina had effectively isolated me, leaving me with few allies and even fewer options. I tried to fight back, to explain to anyone who would listen that I was the victim here, that Nina and Mike were the ones who had betrayed me and then conspired to destroy me. But the more I protested, the more it seemed like I was confirming their narrative, just a bitter, vengeful man, desperate to cling to whatever shred of dignity he had left. They had me trapped, and they knew it. Every move I made only seemed to dig me deeper into the hole they had prepared. Nina was a master of manipulation, and she played the role of the wronged woman perfectly, using her charm and connections to rally support and sympathy from those around us. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself increasingly isolated. Calls from old friends stopped coming, and even my lawyer seemed to be growing weary of the fight. I could feel my grip on the situation slipping, and with it, the sense of control that had driven me through all of this. What had started as a plan for revenge had spiraled into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Nina and Mike's partnership, once so close to collapse, was now stronger than ever. They were united in their goal to destroy me, and they were succeeding. The cracks I had tried to create between them had healed, and now I was the one standing on the precipice, staring into the abyss of my own making. The power dynamic had shifted, and I was left wondering if I had any moves left to make, or if I was already checkmated. "I came to see you both," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "To finally put an end to this." Before they could respond, I pulled out the recorder and placed it on the table between us. "Let's talk about the truth, Nina. The truth about everything you and Mike have done. The lies, the manipulation. It's over." For a moment, they both froze, and I could see the fear flicker in Nina's eyes. But then, almost as quickly, she composed herself, a smile spreading across her face, one that sent a chill down my spine. "Victor," she began, her tone laced with condescension, "this has gone far enough. You're not well. Everyone can see it. You've been obsessed with this idea that we've wronged you, but the truth is, you're the one who's lost touch with reality." Mike nodded, stepping forward to back her up. "We've tried to be patient, to help you, but you've become a danger to yourself and others. It's time you got the help you need." They were turning the tables again, twisting the situation to make me look like the one who was out of control. I could see it in the faces of those around us, the doubt, the concern. The story they were spinning was taking root, and I was powerless to stop it. "No," I said, my voice cracking under the weight of the realization. "You're lying. You've always been lying, but it was too late." The more I tried to defend myself, the more I played into their hands. I could see the pity in the eyes of the people around me, the way they looked at me as if I were a madman, someone to be pitied rather than believed. Nina stepped closer, her voice soft and soothing, like someone talking to a child. "Victor, please, let us help you. You don't have to do this." At that moment, I understood the depth of their manipulation. They had won. No matter what I said, no matter what evidence I presented, the narrative was already set. I was the villain in this story, the unhinged husband who couldn't let go, who had destroyed his own life in a misguided quest for revenge. I turned away, the recorder still on the table. Forgotten and useless. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to do. They had stripped me of everything, my reputation, my friends, my sanity. And I had let them. I had played right into their hands, driven by my own need for control, for vengeance. As I walked out of the seminar, I felt the weight of my failure pressing down on me. I was alone, truly alone, with nothing but the wreckage of my own making. The irony was suffocating. In my quest to destroy them, I had only succeeded in destroying myself. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I had become the very thing I had feared most, consumed by my hatred, my own need for revenge. And now, there was nothing left. Nina and Mike had won, but it wasn't their victory that haunted me. It was the knowledge that I had done this to myself, that I had allowed my need for vengeance to consume everything good in my life. I was the architect of my destruction, and there was no one left to blame. As I walked into the night, the darkness around me seemed fitting. It was a reflection of the emptiness inside, a void where my life had once been. The game was over, and I had lost. But it wasn't Nina or Mike who had beaten me, it was me. Dot.